Welcome back. This is the introduction to part two of the course, lecture, talk, whatever you want to call it. Again, designed to help you approach part two of the course. By this time, you will have, or theoretically, you will have submitted your first exam. And if you have not received feedback on it already, you will very quickly, I hope and assume. And so you'll have some sense of the first part of the course and what the exam is like and the expectations based on the quiz and the feedback. And of course, is a quiz for this part of the course too. At the end of week 10, there's the quiz, and then the second exam is due. Now, this part of the course really gets into the core of what the course is about. It also is when the textbook readings, the assigned readings in the textbook, and the lectures begin to coincide more closely, not completely, but more closely. I mean, the lectures for this part of the course include material that will be dealt with in the textbook not until the third part of the course. And so in the third part of the course, which I'll be talking about in the introduction to the third part of the course, it will be also responsible for the material in the second part. And we'll go from there, but I think it will work out and you'll see where we're going. But for this part of the course, in terms of the material that is included in the lectures, but not in the textbook, for the exam, and for the quiz and the exam, that is what you're only responsible for. The material presented in this part of the course. Now, this part of the course is called Christianity and Empire. It is a time that covers a wide breadth of developments in world history, but also in quote unquote the West, because it deals too with the Roman Empire. Part 3 in your textbook is called the Classical Age, I believe it is. And that begins with ancient Greece and Rome. But during this part of the course, which goes from, let's say, Greece and then Rome and the Roman Empire through the emergence of early modern Europe, we have over 1,000 years, about 1,500 years at least, of history to cover. So it's a lot. But it's a central part because it is during this period that Christianity arose and Islam arose. Now, Buddhism and Judaism had already arisen basically during the first part of this course in terms of the ancient civilizations. So they're older than either Christianity or Islam. They were there before. But Christianity and Islam have had probably more impact on world history than Judaism or Buddhism combined in some ways. That's not to limit or undervalue the importance and impact of Judaism and Buddhism whatsoever, but just looking at the developments of world history, we will see that if we want to understand how world history develops from the medieval period on into early modern period, which sets the stage for modernity, it's really Christianity and Islam that set the stage. Now, I will be talking a fair amount in the lectures, or writing a fair amount in the lectures about the concept of myth. And if you've looked at the exam for exam 2, it focuses on myth. I use myth in a distinct way. So often the term myth is seen as the opposite of what is real. So we contrast what is real to myth and say just, oh, that's just a myth. That is a common general use of the term, but that's not how I'm using the term here. Myth is a way to express an experienced reality that cannot be expressed literally. In this sense, religions, all religions, are based on myth. That's not to say necessarily that they're not historically valid. I mean, we can determine that Jesus of Nazareth was an historical figure. Gautama Buddha maybe was, probably was, but that's more iffy in terms of what is indicated by the sources, or actually more likely what is not indicated by the extant sources. And Muhammad was a real historical figure. But how the stories around them developed, that is where we get to the mythic part. It is seeing the meaning in those religious developments. It becomes mythic. And myth, there is truth in myth. It's just what type of truth is there? Sorry, again, my dog coming in. My apologies for that. I think that happened in the first time too. I closed my door, but he just barges right in sometimes. Anyway, continuing right along. And so I don't want you to think that I'm undervaluing religion. That's not my point whatsoever. And I addressed the issue of theology and history in one of the first lectures. And one of the last lectures I think the last lecture of this part of the course is belief as a historical factor. Because what is so important is what people believe. Whether it's true or not, that's a separate question. And the historian, as an historian, has to focus on the evidence. The historian cannot answer whether or not Christianity is the true religion, or Islam is the true religion, or Judaism is the true religion, or Buddhism is the true religion, or whatever else. The historian, as historian, cannot do that because there is no historical evidence to indicate whether that's the case or not. We can say, for example, as I just mentioned, that Jesus of Nazareth was a historical figure. But what we can point to is the impact of the belief in those religions and the impact of that belief on history. Just think of our world today in which we find ourselves. Islam, Judaism, Christianity, in some ways are in conflict, and they always have been, and they are in massive conflict, not only internally in terms of within, let's just take with the United States, what constitutes being Christian, what does it mean to be Christian, as well as with Islam and what's going on with the Middle East and, and Israel being stuck there in the middle, so to speak. It's a real mess. What is the truth of it all? Well, the truth is that they're killing each other. We're killing each other over beliefs. That is an historical factor, regardless of, let's say, the truth value of those beliefs. So the issue cannot be settled based on who is right and who is wrong. Historically, it has to be based on historical evidence. Now, I could say a lot more about that in the lectures dealing with theology and history, and then belief is an historical factor. But that's why we're looking at this in this part of the course, and why we're focusing on what usually is called the European Middle Ages, which I will refer to as the rise of the myth of Christendom, which was based on the myth of Rome, this idea of Rome as a divinely sanctioned eternal empire. Arose basically at the same time as Christianity was just developing, because it arose with what is commonly known, the figure is commonly known as Augustus Caesar, or Caesar Augustus, known as Octavian. But I talk about that in the lectures. And that is at the time that Jesus of Nazareth was born, the best we can tell, more or less. And what happens with the so-called fall of Rome, some 500 years later, and I address that too, the extent to which Rome never fell, is that the myth of Rome, this concept of this divinely sanctioned empire, whose borders would be only the oceans and the seas and the skies, and who was divinely sanctioned to rule the world for the good of the world, issuing in peace to protect the unfortunate, the poor. Now, did they do that? No, but that was the idea. That goes all the way back to Hammurabi's empire, when he claims in the Code of Hammurabi that his whole point was to protect the poor. The extent to which Hammurabi did that, or the extent to which the Roman Empire did that, is a question. But the point here is, did they do so more than it would have been otherwise? When we start having human beings exert violence and authority and power over other human beings. On what basis do they do that? The question on the final essay is about unity and diversity in many ways. Are there commonalities that make us all human? But then if there are, how do we account for the wide diversity that we see in the development of human cultures and human civilizations? And then what role does religion play? Now, this is not an issue of, what do you believe? You're welcome to believe whatever you want to believe. And on your essays or exams and the final essay, I'm not going to be grading your beliefs, but I am going to be grading how well you apply the course material to the question and how well you deal with the issue of belief of whatever it might be, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, or whatever, to the impact of that belief on historical development. That's what this part really gets at. And it also gets at this part of the course in the lectures, how Christianity, which arose as this Middle Eastern, what we would call today Middle Eastern religion, became the dominant form of the Western ideology, because myth in some ways is just the same as an ideology. An ideology gives us the structures for understanding reality. Everyone is ideological. This idea that only those bad people out there are, crazy, irrational ideologues. That is completely irrational itself. Ideology, which was a word that arose in the 18th century, simply meaning the history of ideas at first. As I use the term, and as the term is used in this course, refers to all those structures, intellectual structures, cultural structures, political structures, that allow human beings to give meaning to their world, to understand the world in which they find themselves. That's what we're going to see here. In Christianity, in the course of the first 5 centuries of its existence, became in many ways a distinctively Western religion. So this is this strange transformation of this Middle Eastern religion, what we would call Eastern, becoming Western, appropriated by the West. And that's not to say that there wasn't Christianity in other parts of the world. There was, but the predominant development of Christianity as an historical phenomenon was in the West. And then how that development spread Western culture and civilization to the rest of the world. What we're getting at and looking at here is the origins of what Roberts refers to as the age of European hegemony. Europeans dominating the world, which we'll see more in part 3 and part 4 of this course, especially part 3, with the age of exploration, the beginnings of colonialism, European expansion, and the establishment of this, what I'll be referring to as the world system, where Europeans, based on missionary zeal, greed, the profit motive, really ended up dominating the world. You could say, well, that's Eurocentric. Well, yeah, in one way it is, but another way it certainly is not. Now, if we told the story this is again getting into part 3, the expansion of what traditionally had been called courses in the expansion of the West, we would see that from a very different perspective. It'd be invaders. It would be people coming in and trying to establish themselves on our territory. And what does that mean? So you can also see this not necessarily in this triumphalism of the European way of life and European civilization, but more as the beginnings of domination and invasion, depending on where we're standing from. But this appropriation by the West of Middle Eastern developments, like Christianity, we can see then too with the case of Augustine, or Augustine of Hippo. And there's a long lecture on Augustine, and that is one of the reasons why, is because he's one of the people I study, Augustine and his impact. But one of the fascinating things about Augustine too is he was from North Africa. He was from Roman North Africa. And he becomes almost the epitome of the medieval European saint. So again, a cultural appropriation. Now, Augustine was in Rome for a while. He was in Milan, but you won't read about that in the lecture. But the point is that why do we start imagining that everything revolves around Europe and the West? In some ways, the myth of Christendom simply becomes the myth of the West, which has its origins in the myth of Rome. And we're not going to understand world history almost seen from any perspective unless we understand this dynamic. Why did Europeans feel that they could go and conquer, establish colonies, and basically try to use other peoples for their own gain and benefit? It's an amazing development, and we don't see other civilizations doing so. There's trade, of course, and there's domination, there's wars all over the place, but on this global scale, that is development of the European West. And that is not to make that a value judgment of this is great and wonderful. It is simply looking at the phenomenon itself. But because of the impact of that globalization of Western myth of the West, Western values, ideals, concepts, Christianity, we have to understand that as a very significant factor for the development of world history throughout this course and all into 109 too. I mean, and all the way up to till today. It still impacts us today. Now, if you don't believe me, we'll be getting into some of those things, and send me an email and we can talk about it, because I argue very clearly that we cannot understand the world in which we find ourselves right today unless we have an understanding of what was going on during this period of the emergence and development of Christendom. Christianity first, and on we go, and then of Islam. It still impacts us today. That's what we're looking at in this course. And that's what I hope you will realize and get out of this part of the course. Even though it is also, in terms of the material, in many ways, the most extensive part of the course. If you just look at the syllabus, it's this part of the course, and it's like 3 weeks and then 2 weeks, and we're done basically. So that's what I hope you will keep in mind as you begin to approach this part of the course and study for this part of the course and prepare for the second exam, which will help prepare for the final essay. That's what this is all about. Given all of that, if you have any questions, please just ask. I'm not sure what more to say. There's the list of terms to know for exam 2, just as there was for exam 1. I hope you'll know those, and I hope you have a better sense now of how you can use that list of terms to know for your second exam, and also in terms of the quiz. Again, if you have any problems or any questions or any challenges, or just want to talk about any of the material, please just send me an email. We can arrange to talk over Zoom or email, or even meeting in my office in person. But this, for me, is an exciting part of the course. This is, of course, part of the course that focuses on my own research and expertise, and that's why I give it the focus that I do. But I would also argue that we can't, again, understand world history as such without understanding what we will be seeing develops during this part of the course historically. There we go. So, without further ado, I won't waste more of your time or call on more of your time. I hope this is certainly not a waste of time. I don't consider it a waste of time. If I did, I wouldn't be doing this. And again, so just email me with any questions. I wish you luck and enjoy this part of the course. Put your effort into it and strive to say, okay, whatever grade I received on my first exam, I'm going to do a better job on the second. How can I get there? If you have any questions about that too, please just reach out and let me know. I will be back for the introduction to part 3, but for now, good luck. Enjoy part 2, and I will see you again. Bye-bye.